Hello, I think we're ready to begin. Okay, my name's Rachel Cooper. I'm Professor of Design Management and Policy at Lancaster University. I spend a lot of time studying cities and looking at sustainable cities. However, I'm not speaking today. I've got a great panel of speakers, and our challenge is the urban challenge. How will we achieve sustainable urbanism? And I've just chaired another panel where a speaker said we shouldn't be considering 1.5 rise in temperature. We should be thinking about 3% rise in temperature. So he set a big challenge. So what we want to look at today is what are the ways in which we can achieve sustainable urbanism, considering that we've got local authorities who often don't have ideas of what to do or how to do it, but we're going to have somebody who's going to tell us how they're doing it in one local authority. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the first speaker, which is Paul Chatterton, who is, I think it says, he's a writer, thinker, and professor of urban design, urban futures at Leeds University. So Paul, sit down here so I can see the slides.
Okay, thanks everyone. What I'm going to be focused on today is some material from a new book that I've got out, but it's framed around this challenge of how do we unlock a new kind of urban future which meets this 1.5 degree urban challenge, but with all the associated co-benefits of radically restructuring how we live in cities. So in this new book that I've got out, I call it a manifesto for real change. What I'm trying to do is embark upon quite a broad civic conversation across business, government, universities and civil society about how we can make this rapid transition to a climate safe and socially just urbanism. I'm going to highlight some kind of elements which constitute that. I'm going to frame it by saying it's really about a new triple bottom line for cities, right? And there are three aspects to this, and I'm not going to go into anything in great detail today, but these are things we can return to in the questions and chatting afterwards if you'd like. But there's three things to this new triple bottom line for cities. The first is a new economic story. It's the degrowth story. It's an economy which allows us to flourish but doesn't do harm to the ecosystems we depend on. It's a social story, a whole bunch of new social interventions which I'm calling the city commons, right? How do we build these spaces in common which will allow us to flourish, and I'll have a look at some of those. And then it's this target, this compelling target, 1.5 degrees. How do we reconfigure how we live and design cities to this UN Paris agreement? So I'm going to have a look at these briefly, and then I want to hit you with 4 propositions about what this means for urban policy in practice. All right, the first one, Kate Raworth's donut economics. The new storyline is perfectly represented by what Kate talked about. It's the middle light green circle. It's a safe and just operating space for society, which is not on overshoot beyond the carrying capacity of our globe, and it's not the undershoot where low-income communities are facing social deprivation. It's the sweet spot in the middle, between overshoot and undershoot. It's a compelling vision for how within our grasp is a new kind of economy. And then the Paris Agreement target. Here's the challenge, right? We've got to get off the business as usual curve in a meaningful way. We've got to get on that 2% descent curve. We've got to get onto that 1.5 descent curve. But the interesting thing is, while we're starting to understand what that roadmap means at an international and national level, we don't have much of an idea what it means at a city or a neighbourhood level. But I contend there are a whole bunch of amazing stuff happening which we can gather together, which points to a 1.5 roadmap. So there's a huge positive story. And it's a story about this. It's a story about a great lockdown and a great unlocking. We have to lock down what damages. We have to unlock what flourishes. It's a twin dynamic. It's the old story of creation and resistance, right? And it's these two things at the same time which represent this manifesto for real change. Now, I want to just make 4 propositions in 4 areas of urban life. These are the kind of 4 areas that make sense to us, that we depend upon for our everyday well-being in cities. How do we start to live well within limits, right? Under those 4 thematics: mobility, energy, nature, and economy, right? Are other ways of putting that. So let's have a look at this, because together, for me, I want to put it out there to constellations of policymakers and civil society activists and business leaders to embark upon this great unlocking. Proposition 1, and by the way, these lovely line drawings are not mine. I'm working with a great colleague at the University of Leeds called James McKay, who's an illustrator. He's written a book called Dreams of a Low Carbon Future. So this is where the drawings are from. Proposition 1, mobility. We're stuck with car culture, but it's only a recent story. In 1900, there were 45,000 cars in the USA. Today, there's 1.2 billion cars. It's an amazing story of a global product. While that's a terrible indictment of how we become locked into automobile dependency, it's refreshing, because what it means, in the same time, in a quicker time period, we could probably put that back into the box, right? So we're not necessarily locked down to this thing called car culture, which is a different and difficult set of things which are interlocked across psychology, geopolitics, technical infrastructure, planning, and lifestyle changes. Essentially, Proposition 1 is about, to get on that 1.5 target, which is socially just, we need a moratorium on fossil fuel car-based culture. That is it, right? That's the lockdown. The unlocking is the great socially just, zero carbon, communal mobility. And we can talk about what that means for every policy and planning decision, what that means for every journey and lifestyle and behaviour change. Because it wasn't so long that we had a very different street life in our cities, and we've landed somewhere, a very different place. We can start to unpack that and understand it and unpack it and put it back and redesign our mobility systems around that low carbon, climate safe, socially just planning framework. And we're already good at the low-hanging fruit. This is the low-hanging fruit. We can already do this. So every municipality across the world can do this stuff already. We know how to do this. We even know how to push it further, to expel the cars from our city, to start to shut down highways, to start to free up whole urban neighbourhoods. And we need a good dose of civic action here. Civic action will be the oxygen that leads to the action for locking down urban car culture. And we've seen this time and time again. And of course it can be done across a whole suite of examples. This is not something pie in the sky. This is not something aspirational. This is something we as humans deeply require and aspire to. So that's Proposition 1, the car-free mobility system. Again, I'm happy to come back to all this stuff in the questions, but in the essence of time, I'm just going to keep moving through them. Proposition 2 is about energy. Boy, have we got a big, centralised, carbon-intensive energy system. We need to unravel that and unlock that. The amazing story that I see in cities is a civic energy revolution, right? Microgrids, distributed energy, local smart grids, energy co-ops, and the most exciting stuff, 100% green, 100% locally owned municipal energy, leading to net negative urban development. All this, in some part of the world, is already doable. It's about gathering them together and supercharging them, getting away from the age of oil. If we extracted oil from this particular context of maybe this seminar room, we'd probably all be sat here relatively naked with just our paper in our hands. We're absolutely saturated in the carbon age. Now, the post-carbon age, its alternative is bubbling up out there. This is the civic energy revolution. Net zero developments, renewable city strategies, amazing developments in zero carbon placemaking right across the world, from Germany right here to London, and my own project which I live in Leeds called Lilac Co-Housing, a neighbourhood of 20 straw bale neighbourhoods. But again, we're going to need a good dose of civic action, because this corporate energy system isn't just going to roll over and get out of the way because it seems like the right thing to do. Those large fossil fuel resources are in places, and people live on top of those places and we're going to have to show some solidarity with them in terms of moving things out of the way. So the third proposition, nature. What is the role of nature in our cities? I call it the biocity. This lockdown of ecosystem degradation, resource depletion. What's bubbling just below the surface is this unlocking of this new civic human city nature deal, this new deal between people, non-people and natural systems based on ecological stewardship. All this stuff is already out there. How do we supercharge that to completely change our spaces away from that industrial system we've all become very familiar with in terms of what shapes our cities? The kind of blue-green infrastructures, the kind of biomimetic design, the kind of biophilic principles are starting to bubble up right across our urban landscapes. How do we supercharge it more? How do we get away from the devastating car-based corporate lock-in of our daily lives towards that ecological restoration? And then the fourth proposition, probably the most crucial for me because it underpins all the other stuff. How do we lock down this utter detachment of our planning and democratic systems, unlock what I call the common city? We live in very uncommon times, okay? Very abstracted, undemocratic urban places and how we make them. Unlocking the city commons means a whole bunch of stuff. People-powered housing, which we'll be talking about this afternoon. Building social wealth, building community wealth, building citizen forums, and again that good sprinkling of civil disobedience which will push legislation in the direction when they are unjust. So how do we move from that corporate model of urban growth and planning towards that urban commons, peer-to-peer collaborative production which recycles common wealth within localised communities, leading to all sorts of co-benefits across housing, across placemaking, across energy, food, water and transport. This is the secret to unlocking this new post-growth dynamic. And again, what we're seeing now with the Youth Strike for Climate Actions, Extinction Rebellion, and thousands of municipalities across the world claiming emergency climate declarations, is a new spirit of civil disobedience and direct action, which is pushing our actors towards radical change. But where have we arrived, or where do we want to arrive, right? Because this is really about stories. This is about telling ourselves a new story. Okay, a car-free, negative emissions, common-based biocity. That's a real weird, techie-sounding narrative. What we need is a really appealing new vision. What's the essence of the story we need to tell ourselves? Beautiful places, community wealth, pleasurable mobility, a safe future together with safe and sufficient clean energy. But the question is always how, right? How are we going to get there? How will we operationalise that vision? Well, there's lots of debates in my academic discipline about what we call the quadruple helix, actors working together to make this change. But this is business as usual. We could do lots of stuff which doesn't alter the status quo with this stuff. Here's what we need. Breakaway government officials, renegade academics, dissident industrialists, rebellious citizens working together to implant and supercharge this new civic sustainability. And of course it's all about this, because we can't just be lost in this stuff and wonder what to do next. We simply have to think about these big ideas, just start small and doable, but simply start now. So I'll end there, thanks very much. And that's an MSc that I run to develop these ideas